The cabin by the lake was supposed to be my sanctuary, tucked between towering pines and overlooking the calm, glassy water. It was where I went when I needed peace. No HOA drama, no endless bickering about paint colors, lawn heights, or mailbox shapes. Just silence, nature, and the occasional call of a loon drifting across the water. That Saturday morning, I wasn't alone. Sitting across the heavy oak table from me was Judge Whitmore, a U.S. District Judge I'd invited for coffee. The situation with our homeowners association had escalated beyond neighborhood squabbles, and I needed advice, legal, serious advice. When an HOA board goes from petty rules to harassment, you can't just roll over the judge. A calm man with silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of courtroom battles was listening intently as I laid out the situation. He had just leaned back, tapping his fingers against his mug, when the front door burst open, and in stormed Karen. Not a knock, not even a warning. She pushed the door open like she owned the place, her heels clicking against the wood floor, her face twisted with determination. In her hands, she clutched a stack of HOA documents thick enough to choke a shredder. "You can't hide from me out here," she announced, her voice echoing through the cabin. "You thought you could run away to your little hideout, but the HOA rules follow you everywhere." Judge Whitmore arched an eyebrow, glancing at me as if to ask, "Who exactly is this woman?" He took a slow sip of my coffee before setting the mug down. "Karen? You can't just barge into my property." "Oh, spare me," she snapped, marching right up to the table. "You've violated at least 7 regulations this month alone. Unauthorized renovations, improper use of shared space, and now, oh, this is rich, hosting secret meetings without notifying the HOA board." Her eyes finally landed on the judge, and she froze for half a second, not out of respect, though, out of suspicion. "And who are you supposed to be? Another one of your so-called legal advisors? Doesn't matter. Nothing you say changes the fact that you're breaking the rules." The judge calmly set his mug down and folded his hands. His presence alone seemed to quiet the storm, though Karen's breathing was heavy, her cheeks flushed with outrage. "Ma'am," he said in a measured tone, "do you realize you just entered private property without permission?" Karen blinked, caught off guard for the first time since I'd met her. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then stood a little taller. "The HOA gives me authority." "That's not how authority works," the judge interrupted, his voice cool but edged with steel. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the faint sound of the lake lapping against the shore outside. Karen's bravado wavered, but I could see it. The stubborn fire in her eyes hadn't gone out. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. And as I looked at her, standing in my cabin, uninvited and unhinged, I knew this was only the beginning. Her lips curled back into that familiar smirk, the kind she wore at every HOA meeting when she believed she had outsmarted the entire neighborhood. She slapped her stack of papers down onto the table between us, sending a few sheets sliding toward the judge's polished shoes. "There," she declared triumphantly. "Documented proof of every violation, landscaping outside the approved color palette, a shed that was not pre-approved by the board, and, oh yes, my personal favorite, installing surveillance cameras without HOA authorization. The rules are clear, and you, sir," she jabbed her finger toward me, "think you're above them." Judge Whitmore calmly adjusted his glasses, picking up one of the pages she had shoved forward. He read it with the kind of patience only years on the bench could grant. I sat back, arms crossed, letting him take in the madness. "Tell me, miss," he began, looking up at her. "Karen," she snapped. "Vice President of the Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association." "Miss Karen," the judge said, his voice measured. "These documents, where exactly did you obtain them?" Karen hesitated for a fraction of a second. "As Vice President, I have access to all neighborhood compliance reports. It's my duty to enforce them." He nodded slowly, tapping the paper against the table. And entering a resident's private property. Is that also part of your duties? Her jaw tightened. When a resident is in violation, drastic action is sometimes required. If we allow one person to bend the rules, the whole community suffers. You'd know that if you actually cared about your neighbors. I couldn't help but laugh. The sound sharp in the tense room. Cared about my neighbors, Karen? I've lived here longer than half the board combined. I've fixed docks, shoveled snow, even paid out of pocket to repair the community boat ramp. Don't lecture me about caring. Her glare could have burned a hole straight through me. But before she could fire back, the judge leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. Miss Karen, do you understand the concept of harassment? The word hit like a stone tossed into still water. Karen blinked, taken aback, but quickly recovered. Harassment. No, this isn't harassment. This is enforcement. There's a line, the judge said firmly. When enforcement becomes selective, personal, and intrusive, it crosses into harassment. And, if what I'm hearing is accurate, your behavior may not only violate civil boundaries, it could violate criminal law. For once, Karen didn't have a quick comeback. She shifted her weight from one heel to the other, her confidence flickering like a candle in the wind. But then, just as quickly, her eyes hardened. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a hiss only we could hear. You can bring in all the judges you want. You can pretend you're untouchable. But the HOA always wins, always. She spun on her heel, storming toward the door. The echo of it slamming shut behind her rattled the windows. The judge sighed, setting the papers back on the table. You weren't exaggerating, he muttered. This woman is dangerous. I stared at the door, a knot tightening in my stomach, because I knew Karen's retreat wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She'd be back. And next time, she wouldn't come alone. The judge had barely left the cabin when the lake went quiet again. Too quiet. Normally, by late afternoon, I'd hear the distant hum of boats or the laughter of kids skipping stones along the shore. But that day, the silence felt heavy, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. E tried to relax, but Karen's parting words replayed in my head, like a warning bell. The HOA always wins. By the next morning, I had my answer as to what she meant. A sharp pounding rattled the cabin door, louder and more aggressive than the day before. When I opened it, 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies stood on the porch, hands resting on their belts. And right behind them, arms folded smugly across her chest, stood Karen. Well, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I told you this wasn't over. The taller deputy stepped forward. Sir, we've had a report of unauthorized construction, possible code violations, and alleged threats made against a homeowners association official. We need to take a look around. My jaw clenched. Karen's ability to twist reality never failed to amaze me. Threats? I repeated. The only threat made yesterday was her barging into my cabin. Karen's eyes widened innocently, as if she'd just been accused of stealing candy from a child. Oh, come now, I was simply doing my duty. But when he raised his voice and became aggressive, I feared for my safety. The deputies exchanged a glance. They didn't know me, but they knew her, or at least her version of events. That was the problem with people like Karen. They wrapped themselves in the cloak of authority, making lies look like civic duty. I have nothing to hide, I said firmly. You can look around, but before you do, I want you to know that a U.S. district judge was sitting right at this table when Karen trespassed. He saw everything. If you want to take this further, I'll be happy to give you his statement. For the first time, Karen's smirk faltered. The deputy straightened a little, suddenly unsure. A federal judge? The shorter one asked. That's right, I said, and he wasn't impressed by her theatrics either. The taller deputy cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said to Karen, is that true? Her lips pressed together so tightly they nearly disappeared. Well, yes, There was someone here, she admitted. But that doesn't change the fact that this man is in violation of HOA bylaws. One deputy rubbed his temple, clearly frustrated. Ma'am, HOA bylaws are not criminal law. We can't enforce those. The color drained from Karen's face, but her eyes still burned with defiance. You'll regret this, she whispered, more to me than to them. The deputies gave the cabin a quick look, finding nothing but a fishing pole, a stack of firewood, and yesterday's coffee mugs, then left with a polite nod. Karen, however, lingered on the porch, her glare following me like a shadow. When she finally stalked off toward her car, gravel crunching beneath her heels, I knew this battle had just shifted into something bigger. Because Karen had just lost face in front of the law. And people like her, they didn't forgive, they retaliated. The deputies had barely driven away when I knew Karen's pride had been wounded beyond repair. For someone like her, humiliation was a fire that demanded fuel. And she wasn't the kind to suffer in silence. 2 days later, the retaliation began. It started with letters, thick official, looking envelopes stamped with the HOA's logo piled up in my mailbox. Each one cited a new violation: unapproved exterior lighting, a non-compliant dock, even the fire pit I'd been using for years without complaint. The language grew sharper with every page. Failure to comply will result in fines, suspension of community privileges, and legal action. Emily tossed the letters onto the cabin's kitchen counter, shaking her head. This is harassment, plain and simple. She was right, and it wasn't just paper threats anymore. That evening, I found Karen and 2 other board members parked at the edge of my property, their headlights glaring through the trees like searchlights. They didn't step out of the car, they just sat there watching, as if daring me to make the first move. The next morning, Judge Whitmore returned. He wasn't surprised. I warned you, he said, setting his briefcase on the table. Bullies don't retreat when they're cornered, they regroup, and she's brought her board with her this time. I rubbed the back of my neck, frustration boiling over. They're trying to drown me in fines, and if that doesn't work, they'll twist the narrative until I look like the bad guy. What am I supposed to do? Fight back against an entire board? The judge's eyes narrowed. That's exactly what you're going to do, but not on their terms, on yours. That afternoon, we began preparing. The judge went through every one of the HOA's letters, marking inconsistencies and questionable claims. More than half of them, he noted, weren't enforceable by law. Others outright contradicted previous HOA rulings. This is sloppy, he said. She's not building a case, she's building noise. And if she keeps this up, she won't just lose. She'll expose the entire board. But even as he spoke, the situation escalated further. That night, I woke to the sound of splashing outside. When I stepped onto the porch, the moonlight revealed figures near my dock. 2 men from the HOA board, dumping something into the water. By the time I shouted, they were gone, tires screeching down the gravel road. The next morning, I discovered what they had left behind. Bright orange condemned signs were nailed to my dock, claiming it was unsafe and closed by HOA authority. My stomach tightened. This wasn't enforcement anymore, it was sabotage. Emily's voice shook as she held one of the signs in her hands. They won't stop until they destroy us. I looked out at the lake, the calm water hiding the chaos beneath. For years, I'd tried to ignore Karen's games, thinking if I stayed quiet, she'd eventually move on. But this wasn't about rules anymore. This was war, and with the judge at my side, I was finally ready to fight back. The HOA scheduled an emergency hearing at the clubhouse that Friday. The notice came with all the usual pomp, bold red lettering, threats of fines, and the ultimatum that if I didn't attend, the board would take further action. They wanted a showdown, and I was ready to give them one. When Emily and I walked into the clubhouse, it was packed. Residents filled the rows of folding chairs, whispering among themselves. Some looked curious, others nervous, and a few, Karen's loyal followers looked downright hostile. At the front of the room sat the board, smug and confident, with Karen in the center like a queen on her throne. But when Judge Whitmore stepped in behind me, the room fell silent. Karen's smile faltered. "What is he doing here?" she snapped. "Observing," the judge said calmly as he took a seat beside me. "After all, transparency is the foundation of fair governance. Isn't that right, Madam Vice President?" Her cheeks flushed, but she pressed on, slamming a stack of violations onto the table. "This man has flagrantly ignored HOA rules. Unauthorized construction, illegal modifications, harassment of board members." "Stop right there," the judge interrupted, his voice echoing across the room. "What you call violations, the law calls harassment. I've reviewed these so-called charges, and more than half of them are unenforceable. The rest are fabricated." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen stammered, her usual confidence cracking. You have no authority here. This is an HOA matter." "Authority?" The judge leaned forward, eyes like steel. "Authority does not grant you the right to trespass, intimidate, or abuse your position. What you and your board have done isn't governance, it's bullying, and it ends today." The room buzzed with murmurs. Neighbors who had once stayed silent were suddenly nodding, whispering agreement. A man in the back stood up. "Yeah, last month, they fined me for parking my truck in my own driveway." Another woman raised her hand. "They threatened me for planting tulips because they weren't approved colors." One by one, voices rose, breaking the silence that Karen had ruled over for years. Her face drained of color as the judge continued. "This association is meant to serve its residents, not enslave them. And if this board continues on its current path, I will personally see to it that this matter is brought before federal court." The room erupted. Some cheered, some shouted, and in the chaos, Karen tried to regain control. She banged her gavel, screaming for order, but it was too late. The spell was broken. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding her gaze. For the first time, Karen looked small, cornered not by me, but by the very people she'd tried to dominate. When Emily squeezed my hand, I knew. The war was over. Karen had lost. If you enjoyed this HOA Karen showdown and want more dramatic stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter of Justice Served.